I'm Margaret, 62 years old, and I never thought I'd be telling this story. For more than 3 decades, I believed my marriage was unshakable. Richard and I built a life together in our little corner of Georgia, raising children, paying bills, showing up at church on Sundays, and standing shoulder to shoulder when times got hard. I trusted him with my soul. He used to look me in the eye and say, "You'll always be my only love." I believed him. I carried those words through every storm, through every sacrifice I made as a wife and as a mother. But one morning, everything I thought was steady collapsed. Richard packed his suitcase, kissed my forehead like I was some distant relative, and told me he had found someone better. Her name was Tiffany, younger, slimmer, always in heels, the kind of woman who turned heads. And just like that, after 35 years of loyalty, I was left standing in the middle of our living room, holding the pieces of a promise he broke without hesitation. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to ask him why, but my throat was dry. All I could do was watch him walk away with the confidence of a man who believed he'd traded up. That night, I lay in the quiet of my house, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a love so deep could be replaced like an old coat. I didn't know it then, but the same man who called Tiffany an upgrade would soon be the one flooding my phone with messages, begging me to take him back. And this is the story of how I went from abandoned to the woman he could never forget. When I woke up the next morning, the silence inside my house felt louder than any argument Richard and I ever had. The bed was cold on his side, the closet half empty, and the smell of his cologne still lingered on the pillow he left behind. It was a cruel reminder that he had walked out of my life without looking back. I wandered through the rooms like a stranger in my own home. Every corner whispered of him. The dent in the couch where he used to sit, the faded spot on the carpet from his favorite chair, the photographs of us smiling like we were untouchable. I pressed my hand against one of the frames, and for the first time in years, I felt small, like the woman I had been before I built a life with him. The house wasn't just empty, it was hollow. It carried the weight of absence in a way I couldn't ignore. The kitchen table, where we once shared coffee and laughter, looked like it belonged to someone else's life. The walls, painted warm yellow years ago, no longer held comfort. Only shadows of conversations and broken promises. By the afternoon, I sat at that same table, staring at my phone, wishing it would ring, but it didn't. Hours passed and the silence pressed heavier on my chest. I thought of calling Elaine, my neighbor and closest friend, but pride kept me frozen. I didn't want to say the words out loud. He left me for her. As the sun set, I forced myself to make tea, trying to hold on to any sense of normal. That's when it happened. My phone buzzed, my heart raced, hoping for a miracle, maybe an apology that could stitch my heart back together. But the message on the screen wasn't what I expected. "Are you okay?" 3 words from the man who had broken me, and for the first time I realized this was only the beginning of a much deeper battle. The following Sunday, I forced myself to go to church. It wasn't out of strength, it was habit. For 35 years, Richard and I had sat side by side in the same pew. Walking in alone felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone already knew the lines, except me. I felt eyes on me the moment I entered. Smiles were softer, shorter, almost pitying. Conversations hushed as I passed. People meant well, I suppose, but in a small town, pity cuts deeper than cruelty, and I could feel it, the whisper of my story traveling faster than scripture ever could. After service, Sister Jenkins hugged me a little too long, pressing her cheek against mine as though silence could cover the truth. Behind her, 2 women leaned close, their heads bent together, murmuring. One of them glanced at me, then looked away quickly. They didn't have to speak loudly. I already knew the words. He left her, for someone younger. At the grocery store later that week, it was the same. The cashier, a girl no older than 20, avoided my eyes as she rang up my groceries. And when I stepped outside, I saw it, Richard's old truck pulling into the parking lot. But he wasn't driving alone. Tiffany stepped out first. She wore a red dress that clung to her curves, her heels clicking against the pavement like she owned the ground beneath her. She laughed, tossing her long braids over her shoulder, as if the world was hers to enjoy. Richard climbed out after her, looking lighter, freer, like a man who believed he'd won a prize. My chest tightened. I froze with the grocery bags in my hands, unable to move, unable to breathe. People noticed. Some pretended not to. Others didn't bother hiding their stares. For a moment I felt stripped bare, like the whole town was measuring me against her. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I lifted my chin, forced myself to walk to my car, and placed my groceries in the trunk one by one, though my hands shook. But that night, when I sat alone in my quiet kitchen, the image replayed in my mind. Tiffany's laughter, Richard's pride, the judgment in every pair of eyes around me. And as if to twist the knife deeper, my phone buzzed again. It was Richard. "Margaret, I just want to know if you're eating," as if he hadn't stood in that parking lot hours before, parading Tiffany like a trophy. That was the moment I realized his messages weren't about me. They were about him, his guilt, his comfort. And I wasn't ready to give him either. The third week after Richard left was the hardest. By then, the whispers in town weren't just whispers. They were truths spoken too freely, stories told as if my pain were entertainment. I could barely step outside without feeling exposed. One evening, I sat in the living room staring at the family photographs on the wall. Richard and I at our wedding, full of promise. Richard holding our firstborn son in his arms, proud as a king. Our grandchildren smiling with innocence that didn't yet understand betrayal. I wanted to take every frame down and smash them against the floor, to erase the proof of the life we had built, but my hands shook too much. Instead, I sank into the couch, clutching a picture of us on our 30th anniversary, the night he had toasted to forever. The irony burned. The loneliness became unbearable. Meals tasted like paper. The house felt like a cage, and sleep escaped me. Nights blurred into mornings, mornings into nights, until I no longer knew what day it was. One afternoon I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen, my shoulders slumped, my once confident walk reduced to a shuffle. I barely recognized the woman staring back. That reflection was not Margaret, not the mother, not the grandmother, not the strong black woman who had held her family together through storms before. She was gone, hollowed out by betrayal. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Richard. "Tiffany doesn't understand me the way you do." I laughed, though it came out broken. He had left me for her, flaunted her in front of me, and now he was reaching back like I was still his safety net. Tears streamed down my face until I could no longer hold myself upright. I crumbled onto the rug, pressing my hands to my mouth to muffle the sobs that had been building for weeks. That was the moment I realized. Grief wasn't just sadness. It was rage, shame, and the sharp edge of humiliation cutting all at once. I don't know how long I stayed on the floor, but as the sun dipped low, I heard a knock at the door. I froze. Slowly, I wiped my face and opened it. It was Elaine, my neighbor, my friend, standing there with a gentle smile and two hands carrying a small tray. "Margaret," she said softly, "you don't have to go through this alone." And for the first time in weeks, I let someone step into the darkness with me. Elaine stepped into my house as if she had been there 1,000 times before. She didn't glance at the dust on the shelves or the pile of unopened mail on the counter. She didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. She simply set the tray down on the table, a teapot, 2 mugs, and a small plate of cornbread, and sat across from me as though silence itself could be healing. She was a widow, 10 years my senior, and she carried her grief with grace. Her dark skin glowed against her silver hair, and her eyes held a kind of wisdom that comes only from surviving storms. When she looked at me, I didn't feel judged. I felt seen. I wrapped my hands around the mug she offered. The warmth seeped into my fingers, almost like medicine. For the first time in weeks, my chest loosened enough for me to breathe. "Margaret," she said gently, "don't let his choices define your worth. A man's confusion is not a reflection of your value." Her words reached the part of me I thought was buried under layers of pain. Tears threatened to fall, but I held them back, afraid if I let them go, I'd never stop. We sat for hours, talking about everything and nothing, the weather, our gardens, the grandkids. For a moment I remembered what it felt like to laugh, even if it was brief, even if it felt fragile. But when Elaine finally left, I was alone again with the quiet. I returned to the living room, my phone still lying on the couch where I'd dropped it earlier. Its screen lit up with a new message. It was Richard. I made a mistake. 4 words. Simple, but heavy. I stared at them until the letters blurred. Part of me wanted to delete the message, to erase him the way he had tried to erase me. Another part of me wanted to respond, to demand answers, to ask why Tiffany was worth more than decades of loyalty. But I didn't move. I set the phone face down, picked up my empty mug and whispered to myself, "Not tonight." That night, for the first time, I slept without crying. I woke up in the middle of the night to the glow of my phone on the nightstand. The house was silent, but the screen pulsed like it carried a heartbeat of its own. I reached for it, half dreading, half hoping, and of course it was him. Richard. The message read, "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about you." I stared at those words, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. He had left me for Tiffany, walked out with his head held high, paraded her around town like she was a prize. And now, in the dark hours of the night, when Tiffany was no comfort, he came crawling back into my life through glowing letters on a screen. I didn't reply. I couldn't. But the messages didn't stop. Every night, around midnight, they came. "Do you remember our first vacation? No one knows me like you do. I don't feel at home with her." Each one chipped away at the fragile piece I was trying to build. It wasn't love, it was desperation, and I knew it. Still, every time the phone lit up, my chest tightened. It was as if he wanted to tether me to his guilt, to remind me that even in his absence, he still had the power to disturb my rest. One night, the messages grew longer. He wrote about Tiffany, how she didn't understand his moods, how their arguments left him feeling empty. He wrote that he missed my cooking, my patience, my prayers at night. I wanted to scream, "You missed me only after you lost me," but my fingers never moved across the keyboard. And then one Friday, I walked into my kitchen to make tea and found him. Not a message, not a call. Richard himself, standing at my front door when I opened it, his shoulders slumped, his face thinner than I remembered. "Margaret," he said, his voice low, his eyes restless. "I just needed to see you." The man who left me with nothing but silence and shame was now standing in front of me, begging without words. I gripped the doorknob, torn between slamming the door shut and letting him speak. And in that moment I realized this wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. This was about power shifting. When I opened the door wider, Richard stood there like a shadow of the man I once knew. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair grayer than I remembered, and the confidence he carried when he left was gone. His eyes darted between mine and the ground, as if he couldn't bear the weight of looking at me too long. "I shouldn't have come like this," he said, his voice cracking, "but I didn't know where else to go." I crossed my arms, holding myself together. For weeks he had haunted my phone, but standing here, he was real. A man stripped of pride, trembling on the porch of the woman he discarded. "What do you want, Richard?" My voice was calm, though my heart pounded in my chest. He ran a hand over his face, sighing like he carried the world on his back. "She's not who I thought she was, Margaret. Tiffany. She doesn't care about me the way you did. She doesn't understand me. I made a mistake." The words I once begged to hear fell flat now. They didn't comfort me. They didn't heal me. They sounded hollow, desperate, like a song out of tune. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill it. He shifted on his feet, his shoulders sagging lower with every second. "I miss home," he whispered. "I miss us. I miss you." For a moment, the ache inside me flared. Memories of decades together, our children's laughter, our prayers at night, our shared struggles, rose like ghosts in the room. But then, just as quickly, I remembered the image of Tiffany stepping out of his truck in her red dress while I stood with my grocery bags in hand. The humiliation, the whispers, the nights I cried alone. I steadied myself and looked him in the eye. "You didn't just leave, Richard. You erased me. You made me feel like nothing." His face twisted with shame, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. "Please," he said softly, "just give me one more chance." I held the doorknob tighter. The man in front of me was broken, but his brokenness was not my responsibility. For the first time since he left, I realized I had the power, not him, and I wasn't sure yet how I would use it. After Richard showed up at my door, I didn't answer his calls for days. His words stayed with me, echoing in my mind, but instead of weakening me, they lit a fire I didn't expect. For the first time in months, I didn't crumble. I didn't cry. I stood taller. Elaine invited me to meet her at the coffee shop downtown. At first I hesitated. I didn't want to face the whispers, the pitying glances, the people who measured me against Tiffany. But Elaine insisted, and I trusted her. When I walked in, heads turned as they always did. But this time, I didn't lower my eyes. I wore my Sunday dress, soft lavender with a scarf tied neatly at my neck, and I walked with steady steps. Elaine was already there, smiling wide, her silver hair wrapped in a colorful scarf that made her look vibrant, unshaken by age. We sat by the window, sipping coffee, talking about our children and grandchildren. For the first time since Richard left, I laughed. Not the polite laugh you used to cover pain, but a real laugh, deep and genuine. It startled me at first, and then it felt like a blessing. Elaine leaned closer. "You see, Margaret, you're not broken. You've just been holding your breath. It's time to exhale." Her words sank into me like seeds finding good soil. I felt lighter, freer. The world outside the cafe window didn't look so heavy anymore. Later that week, my granddaughter Emma came to visit. She climbed onto my lap, her small hands cupping my cheeks, her big brown eyes staring straight into mine. "Grandma," she asked softly, "are you happy again?" Her question pierced deeper than any of Richard's apologies. I held her close, my throat tightening, but this time with gratitude, not grief. I wasn't fully healed. I wasn't free from the scars. But I realized I was moving forward. I was breathing again, standing again, smiling again. And for the first time since Richard walked out, I felt strong enough to imagine a life without him. It surprised me how quickly people's eyes began to change. For weeks, I had been the woman everyone pitied, the one whispered about in grocery aisles and church pews. But slowly, the glances shifted. Instead of pity, I started seeing respect. Instead of whispers, I heard greetings spoken a little warmer, voices carrying a note of admiration. One afternoon, I went to the grocery store again. I braced myself for the same humiliation I had felt the day Tiffany strutted out of Richard's truck in her red dress. But this time was different. Tiffany was there, moving quickly down the aisle, tossing items into her cart. Her hair was perfect, her clothes loud and sharp, but her face carried something new, irritation, maybe even bitterness. She snapped at the cashier, rolled her eyes at the stock boy, and stormed past without a smile. People noticed, but instead of watching her with fascination, they looked away, almost embarrassed by her behavior. Their eyes didn't follow her anymore. When I stepped up to the counter, the same cashier who once avoided my gaze smiled at me. "It's good to see you, Miss Margaret," she said softly with genuine warmth. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible or lesser. I felt seen. At church the following Sunday, the whispers weren't about me anymore. Tiffany had stopped showing up with Richard, and people began to murmur about the cracks in their perfect life together. Elaine leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Child, storms don't last forever. People see the truth sooner or later." That evening, as I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, my phone buzzed again, a voice message from Richard. I hesitated before pressing play. His voice was raw, trembling. "Margaret, I don't know how to live like this. Tiffany doesn't want to hear me. She doesn't care when I hurt. You were my home, and I threw it away. Please, talk to me." The desperation in his tone should have broken me. Months earlier it would have, but instead, I sat back in my chair, looking at the fading sunset. For the first time, his tears didn't feel like my responsibility. It was late in the evening when I saw him again. I stepped onto my porch with a light blanket around my shoulders, ready to watch the sky turn from gold to deep blue. But there he was, Richard, sitting on my porch steps like a man who had nowhere else to go. His shoulders slumped, his hands clasped together, his eyes swollen from sleepless nights. "Margaret," he said, looking up at me, his voice rough. "Please, just hear me out." I didn't answer right away. I stood in the doorway, measuring him against the man who once walked away with pride. This man looked smaller, older, stripped of the confidence he had flaunted when Tiffany was by his side. "I've lost everything," he went on. "She's gone. And even when she was here, it wasn't real. It wasn't love. It was a lie I told myself. You," his voice cracked, "you were my life. You're the only one who ever knew me." I let his words settle in the air. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand why it took so much damage for him to recognize my worth. Another part of me wanted to weep, because there was a time when hearing him beg would have been all I dreamed of. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. "You don't get to do this," I told him quietly. "You don't get to break me and then come crawling back when the world turns cold. I am not your second choice. I am not your safety net." Tears welled in his eyes and his lips trembled. "Margaret, please. Just one more chance. I'll do better. I'll prove it. No." My voice was steady, sharper than I expected. "You had your chance. 35 years of chances, and you chose someone else. You left me standing in the ruins of what we built, and you didn't look back. Now you want me to rescue you from the fire you started. I won't." Silence stretched between us. He buried his face in his hands, sobbing quietly on the steps of the home that no longer belonged to him. I closed the door, not out of cruelty, but out of mercy, for myself. And for the first time since he left, I didn't feel weak. I felt free. The morning after I turned Richard away, the air felt different, lighter. For months I had carried his betrayal like chains around my neck, but now, for the first time, I woke up without the weight of his shadow pressing on me. I made myself breakfast, not out of routine, but out of care. Eggs, toast, and fresh fruit laid out on the table I once shared with him. For years I cooked for someone else. That morning, I cooked for me. As I ate, I thought about the woman I had been, the wife who sacrificed, the mother who held everyone together, the woman who believed love was enough to keep a man faithful. That woman deserved more than pity, more than betrayal, more than Richard's midnight messages. I stepped into the backyard with a small stack of papers and photographs, copies of his old letters, cards from anniversaries, little notes I had kept tucked away in drawers. One by one, I placed them into the fire pit. The flames rose slowly, consuming the words that once bound me to him. When the last photograph turned to ash, I whispered to myself, I choose me. Elaine stopped by later that day with a basket of fruit and a smile. Emma ran through the yard, her laughter carrying through the air. I sat in a chair on the porch, watching them, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Richard's voice, his apologies, his regret, they no longer had power over me. He had chosen his path, and I had chosen mine, and mine led to peace. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need his suffering to validate my healing. My freedom was enough. I smiled, not because of him, but in spite of him. And I knew, deep in my bones, that I would never again let a man's weakness define my worth. This was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of the life I had almost forgotten I deserved. Looking back now, I see the woman I was when Richard left me, broken, ashamed, lost in silence. I thought my worth had walked out the door with him, that I was nothing without the man who promised me forever and then traded me for someone younger. But the truth is, his betrayal didn't destroy me. It revealed me. It forced me to face myself, to stand on my own 2 feet, to find the strength I had buried beneath years of sacrifice. I learned that healing doesn't come from another person's apology. Healing comes when you decide you are enough, no matter who walks away. I am not the woman who begged to be chosen. I am not the woman who cried over late-night messages or empty promises. I am the woman who rose again, who chose herself, who found freedom in letting go. Richard may still carry his regret, but that's his burden, not mine. My story isn't about him anymore. It's about me, Margaret, a black woman, a mother, a grandmother, a survivor. And if you're listening to this, holding your own broken pieces, I want you to know, you can rise too. You don't have to take back the one who left. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone. You already have it. This is my ending, but maybe for you it's the beginning. So if my story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you faced your own storm and how you found your way through. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join me for more stories of women who turn their pain into strength. Because we are never too old to begin again.